Hello, everyone. Today we're going to answer one of the biggest questions from The Last Sunrise. Do Ry and Julian actually stay together after the movie ends? Before we continue, here's your spoiler alert. We're going directly into the ending, Ry's surgery, her memory loss, and what that final scene with Julian really means. So, do Ry and Julian stay together? The short answer is yes. The story gives us a hopeful future for them. But the movie doesn't show us a traditional happy ending where everything is immediately explained. After Ry's surgery, she survives, but her memories have been affected. This is especially important because Ry was terrified that the procedure could make her forget the people and experiences that mattered most to her, and Julian is one of the most important parts of that past. When Julian approaches Ry at the end, he doesn't assume that she remembers him. Instead, he introduces himself again. At first, this can make the ending look heartbreaking. You might think Ry has completely forgotten Julian and that their relationship is over. But that's not necessarily what the movie is saying. Ry has already explained that her memories are returning gradually. So the ending leaves open the possibility that she may remember Julian later. And even if she doesn't immediately remember everything, Julian is willing to start again. That's what makes his final introduction so meaningful. He's not walking away. He's not asking Ry to prove that she remembers him. He's simply giving her another opportunity to know him. And that's important because their relationship originally began with them being strangers. When Ry first met Julian, she had no idea how important he would eventually become. She discovered him gradually. They spent time together. They created memories. They fell in love. So, if Ry has to meet Julian again, their story doesn't necessarily have to end. It can begin again. That's also why the final sunrise is such an important image. Earlier in the movie, Ry thinks about how limited her time might be. Every beautiful moment feels temporary. She worries that she could lose her health, her future, and eventually the people she loves. But after the surgery, she has something she wasn't sure she would have. She has another day, another morning, another opportunity, and potentially another chance with Julian. The sunrise, therefore, represents a new beginning rather than an ending. Ry may have lost some memories, but she hasn't lost her future, and Julian is still part of that future. There's also an important difference between the movie and the original novel. The novel gives the relationship a much clearer resolution. Ry eventually remembers Julian, and the story confirms that they remain together. The movie chooses a more open ending. Instead of showing Ry suddenly remembering everything, it lets us wonder how much she remembers and how her relationship with Julian will develop from there. But the emotional direction is still clear. Julian hasn't given up on her, and Ry hasn't lost the possibility of loving him again. That's why the final scene shouldn't necessarily be interpreted as a tragic memory loss ending. It's more of a second chance ending. Julian is essentially saying, "I'm still here," and Ry has the opportunity to discover what that means. Maybe one memory will suddenly return. Maybe she'll remember their first meeting. Maybe she'll remember the beach. Maybe she'll remember the feeling she had when she was with him. Or maybe she'll have to create completely new memories with Julian. The movie doesn't tell us exactly which one happens, and that's okay, because the larger message of The Last Sunrise isn't that life can be perfectly restored. It's that life can continue even after something changes. Ry can't control everything. She can't control her illness. She can't control what the surgery does to her memories. And she can't control exactly what the future holds. But she can keep living. And Julian can choose to stay. That's exactly what we see at the end. He doesn't demand the old Ry back. He accepts the Ry who's standing in front of him. And that makes their relationship even more meaningful, because he's willing to love her whether she remembers everything or not. There's also something beautiful about the possibility of them creating new memories together. Think about how their relationship started. They didn't begin with years of history. They began with a meeting. They talked, they spent time together, they slowly learned about each other, and eventually, those moments became memories that Ry was terrified of losing. So if she has to start again, Julian isn't really asking her to recreate the past. He's giving her the opportunity to experience something new. Maybe they return to the places they visited before. Maybe they watch another sunrise. Maybe Julian tells her the stories she once knew. But this time, Ry gets to experience those moments without the same fear that controlled her earlier in the movie. That's an important change. At the beginning, Ry is constantly thinking about how much time she has left. By the end, she has a different perspective. She doesn't know exactly how many days she has, but she knows she has another one. And sometimes that's enough. The movie also suggests that memories aren't the only thing that defines a relationship. People leave impressions on each other. They change each other. They create feelings that can remain meaningful even when specific details become difficult to remember. That's why Julian's decision to introduce himself again is so powerful. He's not trying to force Ry to become the person she was before the surgery. He's willing to meet the person she is now. And that makes his love for her feel much more unconditional. He isn't saying, "Remember me and then we'll be together." He's saying, "I'm here, and we can see what happens." So, do Ry and Julian stay together after the last sunrise? Yes, the overall story gives them a hopeful future together. The movie simply doesn't show every step of that future. Ry survives. Her memories begin returning. Julian remains by her side, and their relationship has another chance. The final sunrise, therefore, isn't the end of their love story. It's the beginning of another chapter. Maybe Ry eventually remembers everything. Maybe she remembers only the most important moments. Maybe Julian has to introduce himself more than once. But whatever happens, they still have something incredibly important. They have time. And that is exactly what Ry spent so much of the movie afraid she would lose. So when Julian introduces himself again, don't see it as him saying goodbye. See it as him saying hello. A new beginning. And perhaps the most beautiful possibility of all is that Ry doesn't need to remember every detail of her past to have a future with Julian. They can create new memories. They can fall in love again. They can experience another summer. And they can watch another sunrise together. That's ultimately why the ending feels hopeful. Ry doesn't get a perfect ending. She gets something better. She gets another chance. And Julian is willing to take that chance with her. So yes, Ry and Julian's story doesn't end with the surgery. It continues beyond the final scene. The movie leaves the details uncertain, but the message is clear. Their connection is not something that disappears simply because Ry's memories become uncertain. In fact, the uncertainty makes the ending more meaningful. Because now the audience has to imagine what happens when two people who already fell in love are given another opportunity to find each other. Maybe their second beginning won't look exactly like the first. Maybe it will be slower. Maybe it will be different. But that doesn't make it less meaningful. Ry has already learned that life isn't about controlling every outcome. It's about being present for the moments you actually get. And Julian seems to understand that too. He can't give Ry her memories back. He can't erase what happened. But he can stand beside her. He can tell her who he is. And he can give her the freedom to decide what comes next. That's why their final meeting feels less like a conclusion and more like an open door. The story doesn't need to show us a wedding, a reunion, or another year together. We already understand the possibility. They have another chance, and that is enough to make the ending hopeful. Because the greatest thing Ry was afraid of losing wasn't simply Julian, it was her future. She thought her illness might take that future away. Instead, she survives long enough to discover that even after everything changes, she can still have one. And Julian can be part of it. So when the final sunrise appears, remember what it represents. It isn't the last moment Ry will ever have. It's another beginning, another morning, another opportunity to remember, another opportunity to love, and another opportunity for Ry and Julian to choose each other. Their story doesn't end when the credits roll. In a way, that's where their next chapter begins.